You guys, I've been keeping a secret that's about to blow the lid off the entire Duggar dynasty. For years, you've watched my Aunt Michelle stand two steps behind Jim Bob, smiling through the scandals, the lies, and the control. We all thought she'd never leave. We thought she was in it forever. Well, think again, I'm Amy. And I am here to tell you that the big house in Tontitown is officially empty. Michelle Duggar has done the unthinkable. She packed her life into two suitcases and fled across state lines to Nebraska. She didn't just leave for a weekend, she's filed for a permanent relocation. But why now? Is it the 20 million forensic audit that just leaked? Or did she finally find the secret documents Jim Bob was hiding in that locked safe? Tonight, I'm taking you through all 15 chapters of this escape. We're talking about the midnight flight, the secret burner phones, and the moment she told Jim Bob, "I'm done," the queen of the Duggars is finally free. And trust me, Uncle Jim Bob is absolutely spiraling. You do not want to miss what I'm about to reveal next. To understand why Michelle finally walked away, you have to understand the atmosphere inside that house for the last few months. It wasn't just tense, it was toxic. My Uncle Jim Bob has always run that family like a CEO, not a father. But when the news of the 20 million forensic audit hit the headlines, the golden walls of the Tontitown compound started to crumble. For years, Michelle lived in a bubble of sweetness and submission. She was told that if she just stayed quiet and kept smiling, God would handle the rest. But you can only ignore reality for so long when the bank starts knocking on your door. It was a Tuesday night, just after 10 p.m. Jim Bob was out, reportedly at a secret meeting with his legal team to discuss the liquidation of their commercial properties. Michelle was alone in the master wing. Usually, she stays away from Jim Bob's private office, but that night, something drew her there. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe she was finally tired of the whispers. She found the safe, the one Jim Bob always kept locked behind the mahogany desk. And for the first time in 40 years, it was slightly ajar. Jim Bob, in his panic over the audit, had made a mistake. He'd forgotten to spin the dial. Inside wasn't just money, it was a paper trail. Michelle found documents showing that while the kids were struggling to pay for their own groceries and medical bills, Jim Bob was allegedly moving millions into offshore accounts and political shell companies. She saw the signatures, her own name forged on documents she had never even seen. She realized that her partner had turned her into an unwitting accomplice in his financial games. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. According to the person she called immediately after, my cousin Jana, Michelle felt a sudden cold clarity. She realized that the man she had dedicated her life to was a stranger. She took her burner phone, the one we gave her months ago for emergencies, and sent a 3-word text to the group chat, "I am ready," while Jim Bob was miles away, thinking he was saving his empire. Michelle was in their bedroom, packing two small suitcases. She didn't take the jewelry. She didn't take the designer clothes. She took her Bible, her journals, and the photos of her grandkids. She left her wedding ring right there on the nightstand next to a copy of the audit report. As she walked down that long driveway for the last time, the silence was deafening. No cameras, no producers, no Jim Bob. Just a woman reclaiming her name. She knew that by crossing that threshold, she was destroying the Duggar brand forever. But for the first time in 19 kids and 40 years, Michelle Duggar was finally breathing. If you think Michelle just woke up one day and decided to leave, You don't know how deep the control in that family goes. This wasn't an impulse, it was a high stakes, months long operation. And the masterminds behind it, her own daughters, Jill and Jana. For years, Jim Bob monitored Michelle's calls. He had access to her primary phone, her emails, even her social media. He called it protection, but we all know it was surveillance. So, how do you plan a revolution when the king is always watching? You go off the grid. Back in November, during a casual family visit that Jim Bob didn't attend, Jill and I managed to slip a small prepaid burner phone into Michelle's bag. We told her it was an emergency line for the grandkids, but she knew exactly what it was for. That tiny flip phone became her lifeline to reality. Every night after Jim Bob fell asleep, Michelle would retreat to the bathroom, turn on the shower to drown out the noise, and dial Jana. They had a code. If they talked about baking a cake, it meant they were discussing the legal logistics of moving her assets. If they talked about visiting a friend in Nebraska, it was about the physical route she would take. Jana, who had already built her own life away from the compound, was the one who researched the safe houses and the transport. The most shocking part, Jill had been secretly funneling her book royalties into a private account that Jim Bob couldn't touch. She told her mom, "You don't have to stay for the money. We have enough to take care of you forever." That was the moment Michelle realized she didn't have to be a victim of the 20 million fraud. She could be a survivor. Jim Bob thought he had isolated her. He thought that by controlling the bank accounts, he controlled her soul. But he forgot one thing: he raised daughters who are smart, resilient, and finally fed up. While Jim Bob was busy auditing his kids were auditing his marriage, and they found it bankrupt. The clock struck 100 a.m. In the Tontitown big house, everything was silent, but outside the gates, the plan was already in motion. This wasn't just a drive, it was a getaway. Jana had arranged for a black SUV, not a family car, nothing recognizable, to wait exactly 2 miles down the road at a quiet gas station. Michelle didn't use the front door. She knew the security cameras, the ones Jim Bob used to keep the family safe, were linked directly to his tablet. Instead, she slipped out through the guest wing, using a side exit that was usually blocked by crates of 19 kids and counting merchandise. Carrying only 2 bags, she walked through the damp grass, avoiding the gravel so her footsteps wouldn't be heard. When she reached the SUV, she didn't find a hired driver. She found James and Jason. Yes, even some of the boys were starting to see the truth. They didn't say a word. They just loaded her bags and started the engine. As they hit the interstate, Michelle kept looking back. She expected to see headlights. She expected Jim Bob to come roaring behind them in his bus, demanding she return to her rightful place. But for the first time in her life, she was faster than his control. The most intense moment happened at the Missouri border. A highway patrol car pulled up behind them. Michelle's heart stopped. Was Jim Bob tracking the phone? Had he reported the car stolen? James kept his cool, driving exactly at the speed limit. The patrol car eventually passed them, but in those 10 minutes, Michelle realized there was no turning back. By the time the sun started to rise over the Nebraska state line, the atmosphere inside the SUV changed. The fear was replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. Michelle took out her old wedding ring and put it in the glove box. She told the boys, "I don't want to be Mrs. Duggar today. I just want to be Michelle." They arrived at Jana's new farmhouse just as the world was waking up. Jana was waiting on the porch with a hot cup of coffee and a blanket. No cameras, no press, just a daughter welcoming her mother home to a life where she finally had a voice. Oh, while Michelle was adjusting to the quiet mornings in Nebraska, back in Arkansas, the real reason for her departure was about to hit the fan. We've all heard rumors about the Duggar wealth, but nobody knew the scale of the deception until a court-ordered forensic audit leaked on January 15th, 2026. For years, Jim Bob maintained the image of a frugal man who bought used and saved the difference. But the audit revealed a secret web of over 30 shell companies, entities with names like Tontitown Trust and Faithful Holdings that were being used to funnel money away from his own children. But here is the 20 million bombshell. The auditors discovered that Jim Bob had allegedly diverted nearly $20 million in TV earnings, book royalties, and real estate profits into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. This wasn't just smart accounting. This was a systematic effort to ensure that his 19 children stayed financially dependent on him forever. When Michelle saw these numbers on that fateful night in the office, she didn't just see dollar signs, she saw the faces of her kids. She saw Jill, who had to fight for years just to get a fraction of what she was owed. She saw the younger kids who were told there wasn't enough for certain medical bills or education, while millions were sitting in a tropical bank account. The most damning evidence, a series of forged signatures. The audit found that Michelle's name had been signed on at least 15 high-value property transfers without her knowledge. Jim Bob had essentially turned his wife into a silent partner in a multi-million-dollar fraud. As the news of the 20 million discovery broke, the public's jaw dropped. The pious father was actually a high-stakes financial gambler who was losing it all. With the IRS now circling the big house, Jim Bob wasn't just losing his wife, he was losing the one thing he loved more than control, his money, leaving the 20 million scandal and the toxic atmosphere of Arkansas behind. Michelle finally arrived at her new home, a quiet, beautiful farmhouse in Nebraska. This isn't a mansion, and it doesn't have 20 bedrooms, but for Michelle, it's the most peaceful place on earth. She's living with Jana and Stephen Wisman. And honestly, this is the version of Jana I always wanted everyone to see. She's no longer the family servant. She's the queen of her own home. But there's a reason this house feels so full of life right now. You guys, the rumors are true. Jana is expecting. Our sweet Jana is officially going to be a mom in late January 2026. Watching Michelle prepare for this new grandbaby is like watching a woman rediscover her soul. In Tontitown, babies were often seen as additions to the brand. But here in Nebraska, this baby is seen as a new beginning. Michelle spends her afternoons knitting, gardening, and actually talking to her daughters without Jim Bob looking over her shoulder or checking her phone. But don't think Jim Bob is taking this quietly. We've heard reports that he's been calling the Wisman family, demanding they return his property, referring to Michelle. It's disgusting. But Stephen Wisman and the boys have made it very clear the doors are locked and Jim Bob is not welcome. Michelle told me over a private video call last week, Amy, for 40 years, I forgot what it felt like to make my own coffee in the morning without feeling guilty for not serving someone else first. She's learning to drive a car again. She's going to local grocery stores where nobody knows her name. She's finally just Michelle. As Jana gets closer to her due date, the bond between mother and daughter has never been stronger. They are building a fortress of peace in Nebraska, and for the first time, the Duggars are making headlines for something beautiful instead of something broken. If you thought Jim Bob would let the woman who holds all his secrets just walk away, you don't know how he operates. By mid January 2026, the silence from the big house was broken not by a public apology, but by a mountain of legal paperwork. Jim Bob didn't send flowers to Nebraska. He sent a team of high priced attorneys. His first move was a petition for return of marital property. He's actually trying to claim in court that Mahel's relocation is a breach of their covenant marriage and that she has no legal right to stay in Nebraska without his consent. It's a desperate, old school tactic to force her back under his roof. But here's the thing Jim Bob didn't count on. Michelle isn't alone anymore. Michelle has hired her own legal powerhouse, a firm specializing in forensic accounting and domestic rights. And their response was a bombshell. They didn't just fight the petition, they filed a counterclaim for an emergency accounting and asset freeze because of that 20 million audit we talked about. Michelle's lawyers are asking the court to freeze all of Jim Bob's business accounts. They are arguing that since her name was forged on dozens of documents, she is legally entitled to half of every offshore account, every property, and every cent Jim Bob has hidden away. But the real legal war isn't just about money. Jim Bob is reportedly threatening to sue Jana and Steve Deven for interference with a marriage and alienation of affection. He's trying to tear the family apart just to maintain his image as the head of the house. I've seen some of the leaked emails between the lawyers, and let me tell you, Michelle's tone has completely changed. She's no longer asking for permission. Her latest statement through her attorney was short and cold. I spent 40 years being silent. I will spend the rest of my life being heard. The Tontitown compound is becoming a fortress of lawyers, but Nebraska has become a fortress of truth. Jim Bob is fighting for his brand, but Michelle is fighting for her life. Everyone keeps asking, Amy, what was the one thing? What was the actual moment the rubber met the road? People think it was just the money or the scandals, but it was something much more personal. It happened on a rainy Sunday night, just 2 weeks before she left. Jim Bob was at a church meeting and Michelle was tidying up the master bedroom. She found a discarded envelope in the trash, something Jim Bob usually never leaves behind. It was a letter from a private investigator he had hired, but he wasn't investigating the audit or the lawsuits. He was investigating his own children. Michelle read reports on Jill, Jinger, and even Jana. Jim Bob was paying someone to track their movements, their phone calls, and who they were talking to. He was looking for dirt to use as leverage in case any more of them decided to speak out against the family brand. But the final straw, it was a section in that report about Michelle herself. Jim Bob had authorized the PI to install a tracking device on her vehicle and a recording app on her personal tablet. He didn't trust the woman who had given him 19 children and 40 years of her life. He saw her as a liability, not a partner. In that moment, the sweet voice, the submissive smile, it all died. Michelle realized she wasn't living in a home. She was living in a panopticon where the man she loved was her primary warden. She saw the notes the PI had taken about her private conversations with her sisters. She saw how Jim Bob was planning to, or educate her if she didn't fall back in line. That night, she didn't confront him. She knew that if she did, he would just gaslight her or take away her keys. Instead, she took a photo of those documents with her burner phone and sent them to me. Her message was simple: I am a prisoner here. Help me. That was the final straw, not the millions of dollars, not the public shame. It was the realization that her husband's love was nothing more than high tech surveillance. The breaking point wasn't a loud argument, it was a quiet, cold realization that for 40 years, she had been sleeping next to her own shadow. It was the third week of January 2026. The snow was thick on the ground in Nebraska, and inside Jana's farmhouse, things finally felt peaceful. But that peace was shattered at exactly 20:15 p.m. when a familiar white bus, the one we've all seen for decades on TLC, pulled into the gravel driveway. Jim Bob didn't call, he didn't text, he just showed up. Jana saw him first. She told me her heart dropped to her stomach, not out of respect, but out of fear for her mother. Jana went out to the porch, but Jim Bob didn't even look at her. He demanded to see Michelle. He kept shouting he had a divine right to speak to his wife and that Jana was harboring a fugitive from God's will. But Stephen Wisman, Jana's husband, didn't back down. He stood at the door like a stone wall. He told Jim Bob, "You are on my property now. And in this house, we protect the vulnerable. You aren't coming in." Finally, Michelle walked out. She wasn't wearing the submissive Duggar uniform. She had on a simple sweater and jeans. And she looked Jim Bob straight in the eye. For the first time in 40 years, she didn't look down. Jim Bob started his usual routine: the soft voice, the Bible verses about submission, the promises that everything would be fine if she just came home. He even brought up the 20 million audit, claiming it was all a misunderstanding by the government, but Michelle stopped him mid-sentence. She said, "Jim Bob, I'm not a child you can discipline. I am a woman you betrayed. I didn't leave because of the money. I left because I found the tracker. I left because I realized I don't know who you are." Jim Bob's face turned from pious to furious in a split second. He threatened to cut off every child who supported her. He threatened to sue the Wismans into bankruptcy. But Michelle just turned around, walked back inside, and Stephen closed the door. As the white bus drove away, kicking up Nebraska snow, Michelle didn't cry. She just sat down at the kitchen table and started helping Jana with the baby nursery plans. The king of Tontitown had lost his power, and the queen was finally home. The confrontation in Nebraska was just the beginning of Jim Bob's nightmare. While he was trying to reclaim his property, the IRS was busy reclaiming his assets. In late January 2026, federal agents were spotted at the Tontitown compound. They weren't there for a tour. They were there with boxes. The 20 million discovery wasn't just a family secret, it was tax evasion on a massive scale. Jim Bob's face, once the symbol of wholesome family values, was now all over the local news as a person of interest in a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation. But what did the feds find? They found the records from the burner phones, not just Michelle's, but Jim Bob's too. It turns out he had a secondary line used to coordinate with offshore bank managers. The logs revealed he was planning to move another 5 million just days after Michelle left. He was preparing to vanish, or at least hide the money where no Duggar child or court could ever find it. He was playing a game of chess, but he didn't realize Michelle had already taken his queen. Amidst the legal chaos, a family emergency struck. Jana, nearly 9 months pregnant, had a health scare. Michelle was right there. No cameras, no producers telling her how to react. For the first time, Michelle acted as a mother, not a reality star. She stood her ground when Jim Bob's lawyers tried to call the hospital to get information. She told the staff is not on the list. This was the moment Michelle realized she wasn't just escaping from Jim Bob, she was building a fortress for her children. By February, Jim Bob was desperate. He sent a secret settlement offer to Michelle's legal team. He offered her $5 million and a quiet house in a different state if she would sign a non-disclosure agreement to NDA and return to a united front for the public. He wanted to buy her silence. But Michelle's response, she tore the paper. She didn't want the money, she wanted the truth to be public. She realized that an NDA was just another set of golden handcuffs. The family is now officially split. On Jim Bob's side, only a few of the younger ones remain bound by financial ties. But on Michelle's side, it's a revolution. Jill, Jinger, Joy, Anna, and the Wismans have formed a circle of protection around her. Even some of the brothers who stayed silent for years are now visiting Nebraska in secret. The Duggar Empire hasn't just lost its matriarch, it has lost its foundation. The 19 kids are finally becoming 19 adults with their own voices. And then it happened. In the last week of January 2026, Jana gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Michelle was the first one to hold her. As she looked at that new life, away from the big house, away from the scandals, and away from Jim Bob's control, she wept. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of rebirth. She whispered to the baby, "You will never have to hide who you are." It was the final seal on her relocation. She wasn't a visitor in Nebraska anymore. She was a grandmother, a mother, and a free woman. So here we are. The big house in Tontitown is quiet, under investigation, and haunted by the ghost of a family brand that failed. Michelle Duggar is starting over at 60. She's proof that it is never, ever too late to choose yourself. To my Uncle Jim Bob, the cameras are off, the money is frozen, and the throne is empty. And to you guys watching, thank you for standing with the truth. This isn't the end of the Duggars. It's the beginning of their healing. I'm Amy King, and the truth has finally set us all free.